Market research mechanics. Remember, there's two primary different types of research. There's projectable research, quantitative research, which you can project to a population as a whole. That would be like mall intercept interviews, telephone interviews, mail surveys, but those are different than focus groups. Focus groups are not projectable to a population as a whole. With focus groups, you have a small group of people, 8 to 12, who typically will sit around a conference table like this. They'll be led by a focus group moderator, like the person standing there next to the easel. Oftentimes, they will be in specialized facilities like this one, where the researchers, the people that are interested in what's being said, will sit behind a two-way mirror and listen in and look in. Uh, I've probably participated in, probably about 50 focus groups from behind the mirror, if you will, and the dynamics of them almost always work about the same way. As soon as people come in, they immediately notice the mirror and they're kind of, interested in that. But then very, very quickly, they pretty much forget about it and are focused on the discussion that the moderator is leading them through. But again, focus groups are great for qualitative information, but they cannot be projected to a population as a whole, so they are not so-called quantitative research. Quantitative research will be, mall intercepts, telephone interviews, mail surveys, things like this. Now, quantitative research can take a couple of different things. Cross-sectional design is where you make the sample size big enough so that you can just look at sections of it or cross sections of it, and typically that will be for things like demographic cuts. So after I have the total results, I want to see, well, what is it for men? What is it for women? What is it for people age 18 to 25? What is it for people age 26 to 35? And so on, so-called cross-sectional design. Longitudinal design is for over time. I want to ask the exact same sample of people what they think now, and I'm going to want to ask that exact same sample of people in 6 months, and in a year, and in 18 months, and in 2 years, and so on. Because people will tend to fall out over time, if you're going to do a longitudinal design project, you have to start with a much larger sample size so that by the time you get to the end, you've got a sufficient sample size to be working with. And we'll talk more about sample size in a couple minutes. Now, the questionnaire itself, you want to be careful how you design the questionnaire. You don't want to design it incorrectly so that you've got, bad data that comes from the design. A couple of things about questionnaire design. Open-ended questions obviously allow the respondent to just go on and on and on. So earlier we looked at a couple of very, very basic research projects. One of the examples of open-ended questions would be, now think about the first beverage you tasted. What did you like about it the most? What did you like about it the least? The questions are open-ended. They let people just go on and on and on. A closed-ended question doesn't. A closed-ended question forces them to answer. An example of that would be, which beverage did you prefer? First beverage, second beverage, no preference. They're forced to answer. Uh, a Another example of a closed-ended question would be, these were full flavored beverages with sugar. When it comes to choosing soda, either full flavored or diet, do you usually choose just one? Always drink full flavored, never diet. Prefer full flavored, but will sometimes drink diet. Drink full flavored and diet about the same. Prefer diet, but will sometimes drink full flavored. Always drink diet, never full flavored. This is a so-called forced choice question because they can only choose one. This is similar, but not exactly the same thing as a scaled response question because it doesn't have the numbers there. A scaled response question will literally have a scale of numbers. How would you rate the flavor of the beverage you just tasted? Like a lot, 5, like a little, 4, unsure, 3, dislike a little, 2, dislike a lot, 1. Interesting thing about scaled response questions is they will typically be a so-called balanced scale. Notice that this is a balanced scale because there's a midpoint, unsure, and so it's an odd number. 1 to 5, 1 to 7, 1 to 9. Those are typically the scales for a balanced. One of the things that you'll hear all the time is, well, on a scale of 1 to 10. The thing about on a scale of 1 to 10 is researchers rarely use a scale of 1 to 10 because it is an unbalanced scale. Although sometimes you'll want to force people off of the center. So if I don't want to give the people a choice to be like right in the middle, if I want to force them to go one way or another, you'll use an unbalanced scale, like a 1 to 10 scale. Now, when you put the questions together, questionnaire design, you want the questions to be clear and concise, no ambiguous language, and obviously you want to avoid leading questions like, do you prefer the taste of Sprite? That's obviously a leading question because you mentioned Sprite and you don't mention 7-Up. Interestingly, all research can be leading if you don't rotate the order. Simply by saying one first and the other one second, that biases it slightly because all things being equal, people that are just mentally kind of flipping a coin will go to the earlier one. So what researchers will do is they will rotate the order to remove that so-called order bias from there. Another type of research is so-called observational research. One of the most common uses of observational research is for retailers to use mystery shoppers. Mystery shoppers are researchers posing as customers who gather observational data about a store. Another common use of research is what's called experiments. Experiments are used by researchers to gather primary data. They will experiment with things like price, package design, shelf space, advertising theme, level of advertising, and so on. Nowadays, perhaps the cutting edge of research is internet research. Internet research is things like custom online panels. That is projectable quantitative research because it's scientific in nature. A lot of internet research is non-scientific. When you opt in on your own, in other words, if you're somewhere and you see a thing that says take a poll, that is not research. Well, at least that's not scientific research. And the reason is you choose to opt in and take that poll. For internet research to really be scientific and projectable, everyone in a sample, everyone in a population has to have a chance of being picked for that sample. And so we'll look later on at some examples of custom online panels. Another good use of internet research that many people are using is customer research because it's so easy to do and so inexpensive because it's self-administered. Here's a good example of that. I went to Subway a while ago, and when I got my receipt, it said, hey, go online, take a survey, and next time you're in Subway, get a free cookie. And so if you choose to do that, you go to subway.com, you enter in the number that was on your receipt, and then you take this short survey. Thank you for taking the time to complete our short survey. Please answer all of the questions below, and so on. And what that does is that gives Subway great feedback, and that gives you the benefit of whatever it is they're giving you to entice you to do it, like in this case, a free cookie. One thing that I think is interesting, restaurants like Applebee's will often do this, and then they'll say, and you'll get a free appetizer next time you come in. That, in addition to doing the research, serves as a promotion because it gets you back into the store to get your free appetizer. And of course, you never just go in and get your free appetizer. You order beverages, and they make money on you for your return visit. When you put together research, you want to make sure that you don't have any flaws in the design because that can lead to errors. A couple of the most common types of errors. Measurement error occurs when there's a difference between the information that's desired and the information provided by the process. That can be in how you design the questionnaire. Sampling error is who you ask. So sampling error is an error when the sample somehow doesn't represent the target population. Of course, you want to ask enough people to project from the sample to the population as a whole. How many is that? It's a lot less than you might think. The absolute bare bones minimum is 30, but the problem with just having a sample of 30 is your margin of error, plus or minus, is going to be larger. The bigger your sample size is, the smaller your margin of error, but a sample as small as 50 can reduce that margin of error. A sample as small as 100 can dramatically reduce that margin of error. When they do presidential polls, when they're trying to predict who's going to win an election, in the last presidential election in 2016, more than 140 million people voted. So when they did surveys to see what are the results going to be, how many people did they ask? It wasn't 1%. 1% of 140 million, would be 1.4 million. They didn't ask 1.4 million people. They didn't ask 140,000 people. They didn't ask 14,000 people. A big survey for something like that would have been 1,000 people. Oftentimes they ask 500 people. So you can have, in reality, a tiny fraction of the population that you're trying to project to, just so long as your margin of error, is not too big.